Everybody joining us. We do have a very short agenda in addition to probably the main reason everybody's interested in this meeting, the initiation of our adult day rate setting project that we need to get into. So I'm going to hit a couple topics really quickly. These were covered in January, but I was not able to be here, and I gave Pat a very Cliff Note version of what he needed to talk about, and so I've gotten some questions back, feedback, asking questions regarding some of those topics, and just wanted to ensure that these four areas I actually hit myself so that I can answer any questions y'all may have. The first topic is a situation related to Medicaid allowable costs for the OPEB or other post-employment benefits for health insurance and South Carolina retirement system pension liability. We have completed a research project to determine internally that those costs are not permitted allowable costs for Medicaid. As a result, we can't claim those costs in our cost reports, and as a result, we're not going to be able to allow that to count towards your allowable costs when it comes to your cost settlements. You know, you have the 5% and 10%, 90% and 95% spending requirements. And when you consider those costs, we're going to have to disallow those. But I don't think that's going to be a big issue for folks. I don't think many of you are running a 10% surplus in your capitated programs. Most of you, once you hit the OPEB and state retirement liabilities, you're reporting losses on your financials anyways. So I don't think that's going to be a big deal. It might hit some of your non-capitated areas. But again, as we've moved out of most of those as well, you know, early intervention's now fee-for-service and case management is as well, so there won't be any cost settlement on those, I don't believe. So I really don't think this is a huge impact on you guys, but what you will see is we're going to have a cost report training session, plus some training with your auditors to make sure everybody's clear on how we need these costs reported, because they do need to be in your audits if you're under GASB, Governmental Accounting Standards Boards. That's the governmental side. Some folks may have on the FASB side, the nonprofit side, and for-profit side may have some accruals that we need to tease out as well. I haven't had time to really look at our qualified provider financials yet, or dig into like Babcock and Charles Lee and some of the nonprofits that report to us to ensure that there's no FASB accruals in there that also present allowable cost issues. I do want to let folks know they're online. If you have questions, you can type them in the chat. I do have Ben Orner monitoring that for us. So you're free to participate through that if you would like. I know in the past we haven't done a very good job of that. We're going to try and do better there. So anyways, I need to get probably something out officially as far as a memo to clarify exactly what I'm talking about here. I did send out something as soon as I got here back in June or early July to ask you to report differently on your audits so that we could identify those costs and pull them out. But I don't think any cost reports got updated. So when we get your cost reports for last year, I'm sure we're going to have a good bit of work there to figure that out, to pull those out. So we just need to make sure that we're clear on that. And then this year's audit directive, when it comes out, will have wording as well as schedule changes that'll clarify how we want that stuff reported this year. Are there any questions on that topic? Okay. All right. The second thing is one of our agencies had asked that they had heard through the grapevine that they weren't supposed to charge gain or loss on asset disposals in their intermediate cost centers. So in other words, if I sell a vehicle and it's an administrative vehicle and I lost money or made money on that vehicle, they understood that they weren't to report that within their cost pool. They should charge it somewhere else. Well, that's not accurate. You want to go ahead and charge that to your program where that asset was utilized last, if that's how you code your depreciation. Wherever you were coding your depreciation is where that gain or loss should go. So I don't know how many people were confused on that. I just wanted to make sure that we were clear. I don't know where that originated. Does anybody have a question in regards to that particular topic? No? All right, the next item is I'm not a trained trainer And so we have a real need in our provider network for some technical training. And while I'm capable of doing a lot of it, that's not my forte. And I know y'all don't want to sit and listen to me talk about GASBs and FASBs and accounting standards and so forth. So Pat and Mary have agreed to allow us to go hire a very, very good external trainer. Her name's Melissa Galasso. Melissa and Valerie probably have seen her at some of the CPE courses that we've gone to. She's very, very good. She's kind of the type of person you can sit there and listen to this dry material and not fall asleep, and you're actually engaged. So we'll be bringing her in for a training session April 1st, so if everybody will add that to their calendars. We're going to have to do a sign-up sheet to really track who's going to want to attend this. You're going to be able to bring your auditor if you want. And in fact, I would suggest you do that so that they're right there beside you and hear what you hear, so that y'all can take anything out of that session back to them, and y'all both have heard, the same topic. So anyway, she's going to really gear this towards our particular industry. She's going to custom write training program. It's going to be about 6 hours long. It's probably going to, the times aren't nailed down yet, but let's say like 9 to 4 or 9 to 3:30, something like that. I don't think we're going to be able to fit everybody in this room, so we might have to look at an alternate location. I know some of the providers have offered to maybe let us use their facility if it's a larger area. But I'm really, really excited having Melissa come to visit. She lives in Charlotte. She travels all over the country doing these sessions, and I think you'll really like her. Our goal is to keep this going as an annual training. So the goal is every year, as these rules change and as we review your audits and see there's issues that need to be clarified, that she's coming in and training y'all in those areas. She will hit FASB and GASB, so if you're one of those folks that's like, we all only talk about these boards, you don't really talk about us and what affects us, she is going to hit both of those very well. So again, that's April 1st. She didn't have a lot of availability. I'm sorry it's on April Fool's Day. It's not a joke. I'm being serious that it's on April 1st. If you'll get that documented, there will be something coming out asking you to register. It won't be any cost to you all as a board, but we might have a minor charge for the auditors to come. I have to still figure that out. Just to see if that's something we want to do or not to help offset the cost of bringing her in. Does anybody have a question on Melissa?
Do you think that will be recorded and that
Yes, it will.
Okay.
We will also be able to share the materials freely throughout our provider network. That's in our engagement letter that we signed. We have to protect it outside. We got to make sure that it's only our network of folks that are utilizing those resources, though.
Yeah, I would just, with April 1st, I know a lot of our auditors do tax as well, and it could be an issue for them.
Yep, it'll be offered hopefully via Skype and recorded. We really prefer people be here on site, though, because I think that'll be very beneficial. Any other questions on that? Also, Casey and Debbie have been working on a training plan. We haven't released it yet because we're still trying to work out some fine tuning. We don't want to put out a training plan that we have trouble meeting because there's a lot of things we want to go over with you all based on your surveys of what you wanted training on. So that will be coming out hopefully soon. I do want to hit a couple dates with you though. On February 27th from 9 to 12, we do have that quarterly standard financial training where you bring in your new people. I do think a lot of program folks get stuff out of that. So if you want to have your your day program, residential director, anyone, accounts payable person, whomever, they can come to that. No, they have to register for that, right, Casey?
Right. And we have plenty of room. 22 people have registered.
We have 22 registered. If you want to reach out to Casey if you need the link to the registration, she'll be glad to send that to you. March 3rd will be our next work group meeting here. It's currently set for 2 o'clock. I think there's been some requests that maybe we move it up back to the 1 o'clock time. So I'm waiting to hear back from the group as to what works best. I know a lot of you travel a long way home after this. Yes.
Okay, we did vote today at the Human Services Committee on one of the possible variances for everybody to consider. we're gonna change our times because we heard that as well about the travel. And so we will now end, we'll start at, well, we'll do our 9, 10, people will stop at noon. So 1 o'clock, if it would be open to you,
Okay.
would be advantageous for, that's not all providers, that's just the HSC,
Right.
but once you know, we did change to help that.
Okay, so Jason Taverner said that they had altered their schedule at the human service providers so that they end a little earlier to make it more logistically feasible for their members to be at a 1 o'clock. Does anyone in the audience oppose a 1 o'clock start time? That's what we originally were at.
Yeah.
Anybody have a problem?
I just want to make sure that's clear.
Yeah, anybody have a problem with that? We'll move it to 1 if you don't. All right, how about folks online? Anybody have an issue? If so, speak up, otherwise we'll assume it's good. So those are the main dates, and the April 1st I mentioned already. We will get something out on each of these dates as they get closer. The final topic was related to the South Carolina W-4. We're not sure if that got sent out to you all or not by DDSN. We're trying to validate whether you got that or not. But anyways, just to be clear, the IRS no longer does personal exemptions. So in the past, everybody used to use the IRS W-4 to document your exemptions for the state. You weren't required to use any state form. Now that the IRS no longer does exemptions, you can't do married in 4 anymore. That's not how the federal tax code works any longer. So the state had to come up with its own form so that you could use personal exemptions when you do payroll. So the form is out there on their website, and I don't think you're required to use it. You need to use it for all new employees, but what I would recommend is you alert your staff that, hey, if you want to change your exemptions, and you're going and looking at the IRS form and you're like, wow, I don't know how to tell them to change my South Carolina exemptions because this thing doesn't have exemptions on it or allowances, that you go ahead and communicate that to your staff and say, look, there's a South Carolina one now, so if you want to change, you need to fill that in. Any questions on that? All right, where's Joyce? I saw her, there she is. Joyce is going to come up and talk about the BabyNet bulk approval step that we've identified some folks weren't aware of, related to submission of billing.
I can sit at the table next to you.
Well, you can stay up here if you want.
Well, thank you. I brought my water.
All right.
I'm not quite tall enough for the chair. So earlier this week, we had a conversation with Jennifer Buster, who is the BabyNet director at DHHS, and she identified a handful of providers, all boards, who had not completed the bulk billing process or who were not bulk billing, I guess, more in a timely manner. So just to make sure that you're all aware that BabyNet does require that service notes are approved per service coordinator in a bulk billing process, which means the supervisor will have to go into the login bridges for each coordinator, not each child, but each coordinator, and approve those notes as they are written. Most providers are choosing to approve notes on a weekly basis. One provider I spoke to yesterday said that they were approving on a monthly basis because they thought they had to. You can approve notes daily, weekly, monthly, just in a timely manner, because you will not be paid for BabyNet until the notes are approved. So for the 8 providers who had not submitted notes either in a timely manner or at all, I've reached out to and gotten in touch with all but one provider. And we are working to resolve those issues on a case-by-case basis.
Are there any questions on BabyNet bulk approval process? No? Okay.
Well, that was easy.
That's because you did such a fabulous job. All right, so I guess the big topic of the day is getting to this adult day rate setting. So all of y'all are aware that we're moving to a fee-for-service model, and what we've got to do is start figuring out how to eat the elephant. We've got this big, huge project of converting all of our band services, debundling them, and developing discrete rates for everything. So we've got to start taking our baby steps. The first baby step we've identified is day program. We think that's the easiest one to tackle for a variety of reasons. So what we want to do as we take those steps, we want to give you all, the stakeholders, a voice at the table in regards to setting these rates, because all the rates are going to be pass-through rates at some point in the future. So whatever we land on as a group, we've got to go present and sell it to Health and Human Services and prove to them that those are the rates that we need for a healthy day program setting. So what we wanted to do is, today we didn't really have a lot of very long of a takeoff to actually get to this. I ran out of I guess man, I'm struggling with my terminology today, runway. So I wasn't able to really plan as much as I wanted to for this initial meeting. So what I figured would be the best approach would be to let's just start brainstorming things, capturing all the ideas that y'all have and things that concern you and things that you think need to be thought of as we go through this process. And then over the next 2 or 3 months at these meetings and in between the meetings, we'll probably have to do some work as well, is start addressing those one by one so that when we end up with a good rate that we can feel confident in. Did you want to comment on anything up to that point?
Got plenty of runway.
Okay, so
I'm gonna move a mic out there so that they can,
what's wrong?
if they brainstorming and they're talking.
So let's kind of set the stage. I mean, the first thing is we need to get rates.
Promise to speak up. That'd be better than nothing.
We need to get rates established for our existing service array. We're not looking at developing a rate for any new services at this point. So we've got our day services and we've got Job Coach. Job Coach right now we're going to put on the side and just tackle these facility-based day services. And what we want to do is we need to establish what our baseline cost is. So we're going to have to run a lot of detail up here probably to look at cost reports and audits and come up with what our costs are running as a network, and then discuss that and maybe even talk about why some rates are so much higher or so much lower than others as we try to derive, costs are misleading. Costs are what you're currently doing, whether it's good or bad. And so part of the issue with cost is if you have some inefficiencies, then your costs are going to be higher. But if you're also shortcutting yourself or shortchanging yourself because you can't afford what you feel like you really need, then your costs are artificially deflated. So we just need a baseline. So we feel like our cost is where we got to start. And then from there, we need to build in the market risks. And so I'm going to throw out just some ideas for us to think about. So for example, we need to really figure out our staffing patterns as it relates to not only direct care staff, but also healthy management and supervisory structures within the day program itself. So we're going to have to put a lot of energy there because obviously personnel is the largest cost component of any of our services. We need to talk about acuity levels. Are we going to try to develop different levels of day program rates based on, because there won't be outliers. Outliers will be gone. So how do we build in risks related to serving different levels of needs if we don't have an outlier process? So we're going to have to look at different levels and what the staffing requirements are based on those individual levels as we move through those different pay rates. We need to also look at non-facility based day services like work crews and enclaves. I do realize that there's a lot of folks that run those that the staffing levels are higher than what you maintain in the lower or higher, I guess. You may be 1 to 3 out of the day program and 1 to 7 in the day program. So we need to figure out if that is a justifiable, I don't know if HHS wants to hear that or not, but I think it's healthy for us to have that conversation. Obviously, attendance and absenteeism is a real issue. As you build a rate, if you're not getting folks in the day program, how do you go about addressing that in the rate that you're getting paid? Overhead structures for, facilities and administration and maintenance and all those costs vary greatly by program. Again, we're not going to be able to get rates that are, just for Richland County and another one for Berkeley County and another one, it's going to be a statewide rate. So we've got to figure out how we can blend everybody's cost patterns and the market issues into these rates. Also, you may need additional staff or additional costs may be incurred as you move for fee-for-service. So, for example, if you're needing to put in a Medicaid billing person, or you're needing to put in additional software or services, maybe an internal audit function to validate your billing units, those are things we need to think about, is not only where we are today and what the service looks like, but what it's going to look like in this new model. Also, reserves. Everybody needs healthy reserves, so we need to make sure that anything we propose has a concept of needing a healthy system. If you're just getting a rate that barely covers your cost or doesn't cover your cost, then we're not going to last very long as a system. So we've got to identify what a healthy reserve is and how we build that in. There's a lot of market risk that currently DDSN takes that you guys don't take. For example, if a hurricane comes through and we got evacuation plans and you got a closure day program, maybe you even take in another agency and closure day program. We've got to figure out how that's going to look, because if you don't have people attending day program, you're not going to be able to build day program in the current model. So we've got to figure out how we can address that. I don't know if we can build that stuff in the rate, or this is all, you got risks that are vary by region. So the folks that are on the coast, face this a lot more, and depending on who's sheltering them, that varies greatly. And then you've got, ice storms, for example, that may happen up in Rock Hill area or upstate, where folks in the lower part of the state don't see that very often. So we've got that. If you have folks out on FMLA, if you have, sewer backup, there's all kinds of things that drive attendance and the ability to have folks in your day program. Personal choice, folks deciding not to come to the day program, they only want to be there three units a week. What are you going to do then? So we've got to think through all this. Another big question is, do the residential rates, do they include day program, or is there a discrete rate for day services? So here's the issue. If you're in a residential setting, right now we're almost, in a fee-for-service world, we're going to be in an approach where if I get a day rate and it's including day program, if I send that person a day program, I can generate an additional revenue stream that if they stayed at home sick or chose not to go to day program. So we're almost pushing people. The system itself will drive us to force people or to highly motivate folks to go to the day program. That may not be a bad thing. I'm just saying we got to think about it. So do we need a discrete rate for day program, and it comes out of the residential rate, so that as you have folks that choose to stay home or go to the day program, it's more fair. Transportation is obviously an issue. We need to make sure that we contemplate, we probably as a state, our fleets are really behind on replacement. So if we look at our cost and we're looking at our depreciation on our fleet, but our fleet's 13 years old, that's not healthy. So we've got to make sure that we build out our transportation costs properly to contemplate what a healthy fleet replacement cycle looks like. And then also maintenance of facilities. If again, from a cost basis, if you're not maintaining your facility, but then you got a $300,000 roof or HVAC to replace, how do you build that into your rate so that when it comes time to replace those things, you have those funds available or can finance them? So those are some of the things I've thought of. What I would like to do, I've got a question here that we need to answer. But what I want to do once we've answered this question or taken this question is give y'all a chance to give us some feedback on things that you're thinking and maybe something I haven't thought of, or even giving us some guidance on how you think best to move forward from here. So, they're going to read it. Do we plan to use standardized assessments such as ICAP or SIS to determine the amount of support the person needs? And if so, then you could tie the funding of scores to the intensity of support needed. Well, that's definitely something we need to consider. I think when you're looking at an acuity-based system, you've got to have a way to really tie the true need that's independent and consistently measured to justify the rate differentials. Do you have any comment on that?
That is coming with the payment system, or at least a idea with the payment system. I think it's a universal idea to build acuity into the payment system. Timing of all these things will be different. And I think to have a payment system with that acuity component in it is going to take a bit longer than this because of the public input, the family input. But when you're leaving the band system, it has a lot of cost controls, and you're entering fee for service, the cost control there is individual budgets or some sort of banding budgets so that people have great latitude within their authority levels, but we can't go to fee for service and have no cost control. So that's an inevitable bridge that we're going to have to cross. Whether we get across it or come up with other cost controls, I think is going to be a consideration in the next 18 months when we start really getting into the payment system.
And I want to be very clear that my intent, and I think everyone's intent up here is at DDSN, to get the highest possible rate we can justify. I mean, we want you guys to be healthy. We're not going to approach this from, let's try and tamp this rate down. I mean, as long as we can justify it and we have a really good method that we're using, our goal is to get you $300 a half day if we can. Of course, you're not going to get that. But I'm just saying, that the more funds you can get, the healthier you're going to be and the more sustainable our network's going to be. And the problem is, once we get into a true legitimate fee-for-service world, we got to negotiate rates, just like PCA providers do and adult day health care providers do and nurses do. So in the future world, I don't know if DSN is going to be in the advocacy role because we've got to figure out our admin contract, what it's actually going to look like. I mean, we're actually working on that, but I'm assuming we'll be in some kind of advocacy or assistance role to bring you all together and to help build things. Why do I have smiles in the back?
For that contract role now.
Well, the problem with the admin contract is HHS doesn't want to give us that until we're totally in a fee-for-service model. So we've got to get every service moved into fee-for-service because right now we're in a rate splitting arrangement. Some rates we're actually losing money just straight up on the rate. What we pay you, even without considering attendance and productivity, we're losing right out the gate. Others, once you factor in attendance and productivity levels, we're losing. We've got others where we do make a little money on them, but it's as we go through, there's about 8 or 10 rates that we've got
8 or 10 we split
that we can't split. We've got to get. So it's not. We're negotiating the dollar amount and we're negotiating the content of the admin contract. So really what's holding us up right now, if we could flip the switch on fee for service July 1, I think HHS is ready. We just can't do it. I mean, we've got to do it methodically. I'm just saying they're as anxious as we are to get it signed, but we've got to have our system set up where they're not going to pay us an admin contract rate when we're supposed to be getting that through a split rate arrangement.
I don't know if this is a question or a comment, but, we have, one of the challenges we have right now is certainly the case management rate. And I think one of the things that we're probably arguing is that DHS doesn't fully understand the system, what we do in case management. The worry that I have is when we start looking at the day service rate, we can run into a similar problem where they start comparing our day services to what they call adult daycare. And they don't really look at the issues around final rule and community activities. All those things cost more money. And in terms of making that argument, that our rate is going to be what it is. I mean, do you foresee that we not only have a discussion about the actual rate, but also the service that's going to be provided
which in some ways may be very different than what they're used to seeing in their own DHS world. I mean, I'm
Right,
kind of worried about that.
So the question related to, based on our history with case management and the rate there and some of the concerns as to whether it's adequate or not, whether HHS really does understand our industry and the issues we're dealing with, and would they really understand our day program rate setting methodology and what we come up with if they don't understand what we actually do and they're comparing us to some other service that's already got an established rate out there. And I think, and he also asked, I guess, about the service itself, if we're going to define it. So I'm going to let Pat jump in, but I'll give you my 2 cents worth. I think it's on us to educate them and make sure that we keep at it until we get the rate that everybody thinks we need, because otherwise we're stalled. I mean, we've got to, they want us in a fee-for-service world, we've got to compromise and get to a middle ground with our rate and their rate. And I would say if we can't reach that consensus, then it really keeps us, we've got an edict from the legislature to get out of this system, and everybody else has looked at us, they're like, you guys need to get out of this band system.
I think
So,
another component of his question
Mhm.
was towards the issues that we've had, our experience with case management and early intervention, that many of us are in a board system, we're in the state retirement, we're in the state health insurance company or business. So as we move fee for service, the next service, day services, let's say, and the state legislature gives a 2% or a 3% increase, now we're in the same situation with all of our staff and day program and those affiliated with day program, where do we give that or don't give that, because that would require a rate change at DHHS.
So, the question related to the distinction between folks that are in a higher fringe-based entity like in state retirement, state health, versus others that maybe don't have state retirement or state health, as well as, how is it going to be handled in regards to pay raises and so forth going forward. Again, I'm going to let Pat trump me if he disagrees with me. My thought is we're not going to have that anymore. If the state gives pay raises, that's not going to be bundled into our funds any longer. We're not going to be able to distribute that out. So it's going to be on the providers to negotiate additional revenue to provide those pay raises. Because you're right, HHS basically has said, look, we pay market-based rates. You don't just increase your cost and then come in and tell us we got to bump what we pay you because your cost went up. So I don't know how you want to frame that, but that's basically.
That's the direction HHS is going, is market-based rates. And what they'll say is they're going through the entire agency, they're doing similar rate studies. And their model is that they will build in some level of cost of living each year. And what they're saying is that's part of our rate, and it's independent to, when we get appropriations and say, well, we want to juice the rate to meet our appropriations, they're going to say, that's not how we roll over here. So I don't know exactly how it's going to work out, but their position is we're a rate-based organization. And you saw how hard it was for us to get the 2% for EI and case management. And I think that's an indicator of how we're going to do business in the future.
And so, a lot of other, you guys have worked in the DSN industry, and I don't know how many of you have seen the world outside the DDSN industry to kind of, compare. But for example, if you're a council on aging or a RTA or any of these other agencies out there, they don't get increases in funding for staff cost increases, or if the state health plan goes up or state retirement goes up. They're on their own to figure out how to pay for that. They don't just automatically get a bump in their funding. So that was a real eye-opener for me when I was out advising and consulting with these non-DSN entities. And so I think that's the direction we're headed. The other built-in frustration for me is, in fact, you do have even providers. Some have state retirement, some don't. That's almost 15% of every dollar you pay to an employee. Well, if I'm on a 401k and only match 5%, I've got a built-in 10% fudge factor for my staff based on staff cost. Same with health insurance. Maybe folks don't offer health insurance, and that's provider to provider. Now in the QPL world, you've got nonprofits, they may not even offer health insurance. They may not even offer a 401k, but yet the rate is the rate. And so there is a lot of that that concerns me as we go through this process, but because again, Medicaid's not going to generate two different billing codes, one for folks in state retirement and state health plan and one for folks that aren't. It's going to be a rate. So it's a big challenge ahead of us. I mean, if we're going to bake in all these costs so that the folks that have all these expensive fringes can last and be around, inherently everyone's going to benefit that doesn't offer those. So how we tackle that, and I think that's HHS's stance on case management. They have a case management rate, period. And so it's hard for them to justify, well, the DSN world's over here arguing that this isn't enough, but then I'm over here paying the same case management rate to other folks that don't have the same cost patterns, and I can't drive the whole state's rates up because one industry, has these issues with it. So,
Isn't that the challenge, Chris, the
Yes.
challenge of taking quasi-governmental entities and shoving them into a market-based system that's kind of growing, isn't it?
yeah, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and suggest this. I just want to tell you one path forward is that folks can just create nonprofits and reformalize within their counties, and shut down their government entities and look at a grandfathering process for their benefit package. I think that some providers may choose to do that. You just say, look, Babcock Center's in Richland, Lexington County, and they're a nonprofit. We can talk about Berkeley Citizens or Charles Lee, some of the others that are out there. The only way to get out of state retirement is to close the company down. You can't elect out of it. No state health plan you can, but you got to be out, I think, 4 or 5 years before you can get back in it. And I think historically anybody that's gotten out of state health plan has turned around and go, oh, let me get back in it because actually I didn't realize that I was actually better off inside that plan. So
Where does that leave legislatively that, back in the, I don't know, when it was ever created, that boards were created in every county to provide services and support. So where does that leave that legislation as it relates to the direction we're moving now?
I think the way it's written, it doesn't state that you have to be a political subdivision. It just says that there will be an entity that is established in each county that will serve its citizens. If you want to read that section 44, whatever it is, I think just going over it in my mind, I think, there may be some need to explain some of this to the legislature so that they understand what might be coming. But ultimately, I think that is something we need to foresee, that folks might make that decision. And we need to make sure that we position y'all where you can have an exit strategy if you want to look at that as an option. You answered, Ben?
I was trying to get some more context on Thomas.
Okay.
But is there any data, and maybe this might be a Lori question, I don't know, in reference to what are the rates that adult day health are being paid, and what are the requirements? I look at what we do, I look at what they do, and I think they do great, probably medical supervision, but we're doing a vast similarity to a lot of what they're doing. Our rates are substantially different. Not only then are we developing goals and taking data,
Yeah.
I'm
So-
just trying to figure out where do we start on this discussion about
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, so
Question. Repeat it if you don't mind.
So Susan asked about kind of a comparison between the DDSN day services rate versus the rate that's being paid to adult day health care centers and the differences in the services that are being provided. So I think this adult day health care center rate came up in another meeting that we were in. So I kind of did some research between that meeting and this meeting to try to give you some information about the requirements related to adult day health care. One of the things to keep in mind is that adult day health care centers are set up to be kind of, well, first of all, I provided you guys, there's a copy from your packet that has the scope of service for adult day health care and for the 2 add-ons to adult day health care, because they have an add-on for nursing and an add-on for transportation. So I'm just going to kind of hit the highlights so that you can compare what they're paid for, what their requirements are. First of all, the unit of service of adult day health care is 5 hours, which does not include transportation. So in order for an adult day health care center to bill for a unit of service, a waiver participant has to be at their center for 5 hours at least. They are required to keep their center open for 8 hours, and if a person needs to stay there 8 hours, they have to allow it. Okay, so that's kind of their unit of service requirement. The other thing is they are required to provide a meal and a snack every day to every waiver participant. So the meal has to meet 1/3 of the daily recommended dietary allowances for the age group adopted by the United States Department of Agriculture. They have to adhere to any special diets prescribed by the physician. They have to be planned and prepared in consultation from a registered dietitian. Okay, so they kind of have these dietary requirements that are not, part of the DDS and day service. Probably the biggest difference in adult day health care and what we do, if you look in the packet that you got on page 6.9, it starts talking about staffing requirements. So they have some very specific staffing requirements related to nursing, okay? An example is if you have 1 to 44 people that attend the adult day health care center, they have to have an RN present at the center. If it's 1 to 10 people, 2 hours. If it's, and then up to 36 to 44, it's 6 hours a day. And then it just goes up from there. So like if you have 45 to 88 people that attend the program, you have to have an RN and an additional RN or an LPN on site on staff. So the staffing requirements are a good bit elevated from a cost perspective in adult day health care than they are to some of the DDS and day services. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. You guys have it. You can read what the staffing requirements are. The only other thing in the adult day health care scope that really caught my eye was the fact that a case manager has to be employed by the adult day health care center if they have more than 89 people on site. So that's just kind of something different.
So the rate was $56.40, is that what you got?
And that includes all of that.
Yeah, you have 2 add-ons, a $15 a day for.
Okay, so the add-on,
for nursing.
right, the add-on nursing is different from that nursing requirement.
All right, we need to kind of keep comments down so we can hear.
Sorry, go ahead.
So Jason's point was that the rate is $56.40 a day, but that includes, right, for what?
And there's 2 add-ons to that.
Right, well, so that is for what I was reading you, right? The 2 add-ons are in addition to that. So there is an add-on for adult day health care nursing. That nursing add-on is very specific. The person has to have either an ostomy, catheter care, decubitus care, trach, a tube feeding, or nebulizer treatment. If they don't have one of those 6 things, the add-on doesn't apply, okay? And then the add-on for transportation is for people that live within 15 miles of the center. I think Medicaid's stance is if you live more than 15 miles away, you take Medicaid transportation to the center. Okay. The other thing is for all of the services, there's a time in, time out requirement. Basically, they have to keep they have to keep records to show what time the person arrived, what time the person left. The transportation add-on, you have to have documentation that they were present on the bus in order to bill it, right? So you can't just get the add-on, you have to, let's say mama brought him and you took him home, you can only bill for one way, right? So that's just kind of what I found, and like I said, I made you guys copies of the scope of the adult day health care service as well as the transportation and the nursing. I think there's a way to use this to justify some of the stuff that we do. I just think we have to be careful to say that it's the same. You know what I mean? Like, I know you didn't say that. I'm just saying, I think you use the way they wrote it to help you build your rate around what you're doing.
It's part of our baseline we would establish, right?
Sure.
Not only our costs, but also how we compare to that already established
Sure.
rate. And one of the other questions online was about, have we looked at other states? And I'm going to let Pat's
Yeah.
done some other states.
I would say, let's just go back. Everybody has marginally different cost structures. Your retirement, overhead, your building, your salaries. The advantage that we have is we are building our rate from the bottom up, because when Medicaid establishes a rate, you have to have a justification. And so you build it bottom up. And what most other states do when they build these rates is, you'll build these rates up and we will get to, and we'll put our best efforts into it, and we'll call it 1.0. And then you roll it out to the group, and then people look at it and see how they can refine it. Because no one rate is going to fit everybody exactly the same. Somewhere in this analysis, if you find out that there is, let's just say, like in some states, there is a demonstrable difference between urban areas and rural areas. Okay, and it could cut both ways. Rural could be more expensive than okay, well, that's our job, is to collect the data to look at that issue. So rather than prejudge how we're going to get to the end, I think this is a bottom up. You talk ratios, you talk salaries, you talk overhead. I personally believe that the system that we have in this state, which was founded with boards who have been very successful, and when you look at, I don't know what the number is, I think boards provide probably, I want to say 80% of the services. Now, not all boards have state retirement, but most of them do. That is not a factor you can discount. It's a real cost that really exists for some of the people that we're trying to attract. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to build a rate that we can justify based on evidence. And then at the end of the day, when you get to the finish line, the biggest components that we're going to have to wrestle with are your reserves, your equity, and your risks. Because you are now taking risks that you have not taken in the past. And we need not underestimate that, particularly in a day you have vacancies, final rule, choice. There's a lot of risk in that business. And so when we're doing all this little detail analysis of costs, we're going to do all that work, and somewhere we're going to shimmy that into place. But I think the biggest persuasive fact that we have to build a business case for is, what are the risks? What is the equity return? Because you know what? Whether you're a nonprofit or a board or a private organization, there's a lot of altruistic reasons why what we do here. But at the same time, you need to run an operation. You need to make profit. You got to have equity. You got to have capital investment. So that is a factor that is. I don't know where we're going to get that from, but I do know where we're going to get it from. Is you guys have lived this experience for 30 years, many of you, and you know the risks of operating with the fluctuating, whatever the haphazard things happen. But the biggest risk we're facing is just the vacancy rate. How do we control that? What is controllable, particularly with final rule? Someone mentioned the final rule factor. Hey, final rule is a legitimate justification for expenses that we have overlooked in this arc of final rule. And in fact, as we're putting together the evidence packages for on a community basis for the presumed institutional settings, hey, you are being scrutinized as to access to the community, individual employment, all the things that cost money for a provider to support employees. So my recommendation is build these rates from the bottom up, and as we get to each rate and we see these inconsistencies, we're gonna have to do our analysis, and that's what we have Chris here for. I mean, we can really grind the data, because at the end of the day, Director Baker said, he says, you build me a business case, and then I'll decide. So we're gonna build a business case, but we can't fluff it, but at the same time, I don't think we should go, Chevy or Yugo. I mean, I'm looking for a Buick. I like to have a Cadillac, but we gotta not be, I don't wanna say cheap, but we gotta be in a position to, in the past, you guys lived within your means. I think that was restrictive. You did things only because that was the money available to you. And so I can't compare us today to adult health, healthcare. I think we need to think more along those lines than think in where we've been before. Because it all gets down to, can we justify it? And part of the justification is not only the cost, part of the justification is, what are other people doing? You go to Georgia, they have a lot of, I think they're paying a lot higher rate in Georgia. At the same time, they have higher expectations as far as quality and type of programming. So it's our canvas to draw. And I think when we get to programming, maybe some of our programming today is a function of money available. But at the end of the day, as we move into this new world, as a provider, you're going to have to put a quality product on the field to attract people to come. And so maybe in the past, because of the dynamics of the bands and the bundled rate, that kind of got lost in the shuffle. But I would not sell ourselves short that you have got to put a quality program on the table, because you need to generate a service that is available to waiver consumers so that both can succeed. So this is not, I wouldn't think out of it coming from a incremental increase of where we're at. I think we have a clear canvas in front of us that we need to draw up a program of transportation, programming, staffing levels, community integration, and even think differently. I know Mary had an idea of what 3 sessions, because you have an afternoon session, because gives family greater choice as far as, but all that costs money. So I think it's more of a work our way up through costs and ideas, and then let the staff here in between sessions do all the legwork to collect, so that we can keep on informing ourselves to get to a rate. And we may get to the finish line, and even though we don't have an acuity-based system, we might have to say, well, based on certain common sense things, certain consumers with certain risk factors should deserve a higher rate, because of when they come to your day program, you know right away they're 1 to 3. You just know it. How we do that, how we do it in a time that's available to us, I don't think we're rushed. And I don't think anybody's going to ram down a rate on you. I think this, at the end of the day, this is going to be your rate, and I think our job is going to be our rate, but we got to make sure that when we get to the finish line, that we have enough business case to back up why we're asking for what we're asking for. And I believe this is a very risky business, going into an environment where final rules kicking in, you are have people have greater choices, and that vacancy rate issue that maybe our consumers have gotten used to a certain way of operating, that they may have to operate differently as well. So we got them to develop. So nothing's going to happen overnight, but we got to start engaging these issues in an incremental fashion. And ultimately, I believe that we're going to have these meetings. We're probably going to have some subcommittees, and staff up here is going to do a lot of information shagging with other states, with other with our cost reports. And at some point, we're going to arrive at some number-ish, and then that's where HHH is going to have to get involved. But Director Baker has the authority to make the decision based on a reasonable cost analysis and a market rate analysis. So they may take what we give them, and they may do their own gyrations to it. Our job is to give them the best product possible for the product that we think is going to serve our consumers, and we can never forget a healthy system. I feel like this system's always been, the water level's been at your chin since I've been here. And we got to get to a point where it's healthy, not Cadillac healthy, but not Hyundai healthy. I own a Honda.
What's wrong with
that's
the
why I used it. I own one. That's why I used it.
Yes, Tyler.
Yeah, a question and a comment. My question, well, maybe comment first and question. I know you probably don't want to get too deep in the weeds on acuity in this setting, but one thing I think we have to make sure we recognize is the monster wave that's coming with the autism spectrum. And that there are things that we probably need to be doing now, but certainly in the future that we're not doing, that we're not capturing cost of right now. And so how we predict what those costs should be and build that in, I'm not smart enough to answer, but I do know we have to account for that. There's this wave of autistic spectrum students who are in school right now who are going to be needing services. So that's my comment. My question is time frame for this initiative that we're kind of kicking off today. Are you wanting to pitch a rate by fiscal year end to DHHS? Is this a 6-month endeavor? Is this a 3-month endeavor? What kind of time frame are you, ballpark?
First of all, as long as it takes, but I think at some point when everything starts coalescing, we have to bring HHS into the fight because they may bring parameters that we don't even know as to what their limitations are, or we may say we need certain things, but at some point, the quicker we get the rates, it has to be a fair rate, and I think it's going to be, if we rush, we're going to lose the confidence of everybody, and the best system I saw was with Georgia, where when they built rates, they would basically come to they would break out all the components, just like the Mercer report tried to do, but they had the wrong factors, wrong data to the factors. And then you roll it back to the crowd. And then people look at their world, and all of a sudden you're going to have Thrive Upstate's going to say, this transportation thing, X number doesn't work for me because I'm outlier. And all of a sudden we start zeroing in on a number, or we zero in and we may find the data drives us towards, hey, we've got to have some sort of acuity rate, and we've got to have some sort of transportation rate based on uniqueness of counties. So the data is going to drive us where we're going to go, not our, but the ideas that we come up with this group and the framework that Chris is going to come up with, we have to build a cost model of current costs. Okay, and I call that's a constrained model because we're only doing that because that's all the money we have. Now we're going to come up with a market rate. Now we have something to build on. You have something hard, you can say, hey, our current overhead is this. What's our overhead in the future going to be? What's a fair overhead? You may find out that, you may have a whole plethora of things out there. People may have old buildings with huge maintenance costs coming. Some people may have buildings with mortgages on it that other people don't have. We got to really understand that because the rate truly has to fit everybody. And when you have to fit everybody under that tent, there are going to be some people with low cost models that can do very, very well. But at the same time, our job is just to say, here are the requirements for the service. And the requirements for the service are what we're going to build. And there's always going to be those exceptions. I have this, I have that. Our job is to get those exceptions to the best of our ability factored in. And if there are some sort of outlying exceptions, the most notable being urban, rural type issues where states do provide a different rate based on those things, but we have to have the data to support it. So I think there's a lot of number mentioned. There's a lot of good ideas, and I think we don't need to be limited just by the numbers. I think we need to be limited by common sense and your experience and what other states are doing. Because if others, really, if you look at a lot of day program rates elsewhere, they're way north of us. So I don't think we're like in some position where we have to defend our current rate in this model.
I don't think there's any specific urgency to get this done, and we want to do it right. Thing is, we've just got to show good faith effort that we're trying to move the ball down the field, and we're not stuck on the 5-yard line. That's what our effort is right now. We're not looking at switching flipping a switch July 1 or anything like that. So, you know, we're committed to do it as correctly as possible to ensure the health of our agencies. I do have an online question if I can. She's asking about, are there any laws related to getting together and talking about rates? I mean, this isn't anything monopolistic or, you know, any kind of, I mean, that we're tasked with as a group trying to develop a rate. So we're seeking feedback and input from our providers. You know, every other, you know, HHS is dealing with market pressures and a lot of other service lines. So that's due to, you know, those entities saying, hey, we need to increase or we need a higher rate. So I'm not aware of anything. I mean, HHS is fully aware of our approach with you guys. So I don't think there's anything to that. That was a good question. Keep us out of hot water, Donna.
My question had to do with, Pat, you were talking about looking at other states and models that, you know, they're using. I know one of the issues with the report had to do with our service definitions. And so when you look at those other states, are you seeing service definitions that are more specified? I mean, ours kind of all run together in some respects. So are we looking at just having one definition of day services and not career prep and day activity and community services, or are we looking at truly breaking those out still?
I'll let Lori jump in here a second. I will agree to your part about our current definitions. I think that has been said from a number of different quarters to include the Mercer report. The devil in the details, the other state. When you see the rate, now you have to get down to what's in that rate. And I think that's where I've had a hard time getting to that, but I've never had this type of pressure like we actually needed. So Georgia, North Carolina, the surrounding states, these are your rates. We got to find out, what is transportation in or out? Is transportation separately? You know, there's a lot of things. What's the time commitment? So we have got to get those, because I think a lot of those things at least give us, it gives us a benchmark to compare what we're thinking with other states. And so we've got to run that down. I don't know if it's persuasive that just because Georgia gets it, we get it. That ain't going to roll. What we have to build ours up from our own internal justifications. But when we build ours up and show other states we're all in the same ballpark, it gives credibility to what we're doing. So the answer is we've got to run that down. Just because Georgia gets it doesn't mean we're going to get it, but it gives us something to compare and contrast. I'll go to waiver case management. One of the things that really hurt us in that rate was them comparing our case management rate to the CLTC. They couldn't get over that. So it was an anchor to the negative. I think there's anchors to the positive. And again, I'm with Chris. We're supposed to be the honest broker. So we're going to grab all that data and we're going to bring it to bear, but we've got to bring it to bear, not from a, hey, let's try to get this as high as possible. We just want to get a fair, robust rate so that when we start it, you're not immediately in the position of the water's right here. And one snowstorm, I'm underwater. That's what we got to avoid. Because I feel that's you can't, when we get rid of the, I don't think get rid of the safety net's a good example, but when people have more autonomy and more risk, you've got to have some sort of compensation to weather those storms that inherently come, whether it's the flu or any number of those things. And I think that's a real critical factor. And the other real critical factor is whatever rate we come and we roll it out there, this is Medicaid's ultimate test is you got to, is it a sufficient rate to bring providers to serve our people? And it's got to pass that test because people will walk with their feet. And if we don't support the system with sufficient quality, it's going to undermine the success of the system.
Did you have anything to add, Laura?
I think your question about definitions of service is kind of a valid point that we probably should look at, because we have several different day service types and each one kind of has its own little nuance. So as we look at the waiver renewal and, kind of shoring up definitions of service, I think, trying to look to see if there's a way to consolidate some of those services into one service type. It might make it a little easier on providers. We want to make sure that we continue to do what people need, so that's going to be part of it too. But I think it's worth looking at.
Yes, sir.
How we break it up to the units.
Sure.
And the hours, a full day, with that morning unit, afternoon unit. Probably look at all of that.
Well, Medicaid's going to dictate the unit to us, right?
Well, so
We can do an hourly day unit.
So initially we got, some of y'all might be familiar with the fact that we're having to transition to national codes for some of our services. And so initially they gave us a list and day services were on that list that we were going to have to move from a half-day unit to a daily unit. And they initially said, well, you're going to move to a daily unit, but we're going to give you the ability to bill half a day. Well, they just came back on Monday and said, yeah, we all can bill half a day. So for that reason, we're not going to mess with it right now. But I think it's worth, as we look long term, is a daily unit better than a half day unit, knowing that Medicaid doesn't have the ability to bill half units on a daily unit. The reason's obvious, right? Because a day could mean anywhere from 5 hours to 24 hours, and what is the actual definition of a day? So how do you determine what the half unit is? That's where their issue is. But anyway, we can kind of work through that too. I think we have been very prescriptive about the half day unit. It starts before noon, it ends at noon, it starts after noon. We might want to look at coming off of that a little bit to allow providers flexibility about how they provide that half day unit. I think all of that is up for discussion, right? So.
Question. So, but are you saying Medicaid really wants us to go to a day? I'm trying to make sure I understood all that.
So initially, Medicaid came to DDSN and said, we have these codes that we're billing for that don't correspond with national billing codes. Basically, the state made up these codes and said, we're going to use X, whatever. Well, it's not really a code. So our state Medicaid agency was told by CMS, you got to go to national billing codes. You can't be having any more made up codes. So I'm just telling you, that's kind of how it went down. So they said, okay, we're going to move all these old codes to these national codes. So we got this list of codes that we're changing. The struggle is the National Code Book defines codes two ways: day and 15 minute. There's nothing in between. There's no 2 hours, there's no hour, there's no half day. So Medicaid kind of gave us this list and said, okay, all these codes have to change. So they're going to change on 7/1/20. So we've been working on kind of the easiest way for DDSN to accomplish that national code transition that will require less from the case manager, because it kind of becomes this big drama of all the plans have to be updated, all the authorizations have to be redone, all the billing files have to change, So we've been working on how we're going to accomplish that. Well, the day services were on the initial list that they sent us, but they just came back at the beginning of this week and said, we're going to change the code to the national code, but we're going to allow y'all to continue to bill a half a day. At least for now.
Pretty big decision point as we think about units.
Sure.
Because, like as I read that, it's 5 for a typical day, 4 if they had a doctor's appointment on either side of it. But as we start digging into our units, if we're going half day, that's one thing. But if I got to account for 5, let's just make it easy, not the 4 business. That could be a different matter.
Right.
As we get into cost. And
at this
that's the
point,
decision point that needs to be made, I think, and then that's what it is.
So their initially what they said was, we're going to call it a whole day unit, but we're going to let you continue to define it and bill it the way you always have. Well, what happened was they couldn't figure that out. So they said, we're just going to let you leave it at half day, which is a win for now, but who knows if 2 years from now, somebody doesn't say, oh yeah, South Carolina, you can't bill a half day unit. So we might be back at the drawing board at that
You're
point.
exactly describing what would be my fear,
Right.
is that we get all the way into this thing, and we get billed on something, and then, oh no, guys, the game just changed. Instead of doing half, we're doing whole, or
Yeah.
whatever it is. And it can make some of our analysis off.
Mhm.
Or it would eliminate choice immediately. Because I would say, well, you can better come 5 hours a day. I mean, that's the way I can make it.
I mean, I think,
That'd be the hard part. That's the kind of stuff I think we got kind of just.
That's right,
well, I
unequivocally.
think a lot of that uncertainty just comes with the industry we're in and the fact that we're jerked around by as national things or state level things we don't control change. And I think we can think about those things, but I don't have a crystal ball, so I think there's going to be,
I'm just advocating that if we.
We gotta figure this one out
It's
at
kind of
least.
screwy.
yeah.
My 2 cents, why don't you go to the day rate and say, you know what, you do it for all this other stuff, they like day in 15 minutes. Let's build, and I'm not saying we won't do it, but let's just be aggressive and tell them what we want to do so that we can have a solid ground to start from. We're gonna enter it now.
The problem is if you build it as a daily rate, anything less than 5 hours is probably not going to fly.
Right, but I want to know that now versus 2 years from now.
I got you.
Because 2 years from now, we won't be sitting here and then, you know, the provider network's gonna have to go argue it, or I don't know what's gonna happen, but it sounds kind of dire. Because it was hard to get a, 2% increase to these guys at DHHS. Are they gonna care about, okay, no, I'm sorry, today now. Deal with it. That worries me.
It'd almost be better, in my mind, to do it by 15 minutes because we have people who attend, one unit is 2 to 3 hours.
That actually came from a state plan service unit that HHS had in place. So that's how that 2 to 3 hours got there.
So, but if you have someone who's there for 4, you can only bill 4 hours, you can only bill for 1 minute.
Yeah.
And that's very confusing to a lot of people to understand how to account for the time
Right.
the person's there. If it was in smaller increments, we could.
The challenge with smaller increments is if you have 300 people in your day runs around.
You have to,
You're gonna have a full-time person every day only doing billing all day long.
well, you basically have to have documentation that each unit of service was provided.
Right.
So that's the issue with 15 minutes. And that's the issue we run into with case management. It's hard to, you're really justifying every minute of work that you're doing
Yeah.
when you get to those smaller units.
And also, I've been in case management 10 years before I went over to the day program, and you got to eliminate your time with the individuals. So it's more documentation and less engagement with the individuals. And that's why I kind of went over to the day program, because I signed up to be engaged with the individuals. I found myself sitting at the desk all day doing documentation. And I think our population needs that, involvement to make a difference. I mean, that's just my opinion about it.
I hear you.
Yeah.
You mentioned employment, which would be group employment, where you're going to have a lower ratio. So that would be a higher cost. Do we foresee 1 day rate? Because each of these services, although we're paid the same day rate, are different things. Is there going to be multiple day rates based on that? Or is it going to be 1 day rate? We're going to try and figure out how to balance those four services.
I think there's a big argument for group employment having a higher rate.
Yeah, I was going to
Especially
say
if you're
that
going
it's going to come down to our cost justification. Hey,
Sure.
if we can clearly show that this service runs more money and it's always different than these others, then that's on us to sell that story, I think. And make
And
that-
there are different billing codes for each of the services. So there is a way to ask for a different rate.
But what is our goal? Is our goal 1 rate for everything?
That's what y'all's goal is.
I think that's the purpose of the conversation.
We've got to build out what the provider network says they need to be successful and to address their.
I think that's a totally different thought process for us. Because like you said, we're used to existing on, this is the rate for this, regardless of what it is.
Right.
My fear is some of the staffing for the site with performance will not make it, and none of people consider that was out because you're not gonna be able to fund the smaller ratios. That is my fear.
We're already seeing that in providers where, their day program costs are the comment was that if we don't do the rate for group employment, that's going to drive a lot of folks out of employment group opportunities because of the cost factors that are involved. And we're already seeing that in provider analysis as we go through and look at why is someone's per diem so high. It's because they've got all these small work crews out there that they can't bill the customer enough to support the staff cost. So to me, we've got to get the rate so that it supports that staff level, or we will have problems with those types of small work crew options.
If we were gonna base it on acuity levels, would we need to have them separate?
Well, I think there's a difference between an acuity level versus the program.
Correct.
And I think those are two different arguments.
Yeah, the service versus the need.
Right, and I think, yeah.
But if you have only if you have a day rate, then you only have one service.
So right now we have several services, and they're all different billing codes. They all happen to have the same rate.
Mm-hmm.
Well, kind of. So they all happen to have the same rate, and for all populations. That's the other question. Should the rates be different for one population than they are for another?
Autism or
HASKI, or right. Or should there be a different rate for certain population groups?
Yes.
Based on a person's care needs, we have people who need a 1 to 2 ratio right now in the building. We can't afford to provide that.
That'd be more the acuity side than the population side.
Well, we're going to have to mesh because you're not able to serve everyone that you want to serve.
So we're kind of going through that right now with that.
Right.
We could justify that all day long. We're not in a position to do that at this point, because it's all part of this discussion. But folks usually with the brain injury require a lot more supervision, hands-on, hand over hand.
Sure.
Chair, you still have a comment?
I got a question, actually. I'm kind of looking at process a little bit, and I really appreciate this large group discussion. But my question, I guess, is moving forward. There's going to be a lot of work in the weeds and getting into a lot of detail. How do you foresee this process moving forward? Are you going to continue to have us come in and then you're going to present something, or are you going to develop smaller groups? What's sort of the process that you envision to get us to that goal that you're looking to achieve?
Okay, so the question is, what's this process going to look like going forward? Are we going to have 100 people in the room every time, or are we going to do something else? I think what we've got to do is have the providers, Pat, kick in if you have a different view. A lot of this we're developing on the fly, so if you can see, we don't have a preconceived idea of this. It's just, my view is y'all elect a subcommittee of yourselves, and y'all have whatever meetings to have individually, whether it's regional, whether it's human service provider versus coalition, whether it's QPL versus board, whatever the groups are, and those folks be the primary voice for all the members of that particular area. I do think it's very hard to build consensus in a group of 80 people. So I think what I'm hoping to do is create a set of tools or procedures that we can use to get us all moving the same direction so that we don't have the kitchen sink being turned in at meetings. So that when we meet, we've got, very consistent input from everybody. But I would open that up to you all. I would suggest that we do some smaller group, whether it's 10 or 15 or something like that, a mix of finance people versus day program people, mix of QPLs versus boards. I don't know.
Yeah. I think the challenge is, like most of these efforts is the data needs to inform the group. And we can't expect everybody to run out and be data collectors. We got to figure out how to do that. And that's our job. We're staff. But the last thing we want to do is collect in isolation so that all of a sudden, even just we got to be in the collection together, but it's hard to say, hey, Jerry, could you go out and survey surrounding states? You got a full-time job too. So do we. Somewhere there has to be that collaboration and small groupitis.
Depends on what states you send me to.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, there's certain data sets we got to know what other states are doing. We got to build our costs. That's going to take a lot of time. And part of the costs are going to be, is there some sort of deviation between rural and urban, and the transportation issue, all those things. We got a lot of data, and that we're going to crank through a lot of data. We just want to build a model that as we're cranking through the data, you feel comfortable that, you know, we're not cooking the books. And not that we would, and obviously I think, Chris, it brings a lot of credibility to the table. So I think that's a great question of how do we move forward so that we don't show up every time and brainstorm. We got to move beyond brainstorming into shaping a rate. And I think we break, like most problems, we break down the rate. People are going to run down the cost side. People are going to run down the state side. People are going to run down the equity side or the vacancy rate issue. If I posed a question to you and said, what's your current vacancy rate? What's your current attendance rate? And if you were given in 2 years that, how would that have to change your business practices in order to do that? I mean, now all of a sudden we have a big education group effort to individuals we serve because they have a certain habit of how they get it. So there's all those factors. I think we'll break it down. Some people will devote a lot more time, and we're gonna push the data forward, and we want enough of you around the data so that you're in there, and when you get to the finish line and we start presenting to the group, it's just not us. It's us, and some of you helped us collect that data.
And Pat, that was one of my questions as far as the data collection.
Yeah.
Okay. So, because I know you have access to a lot of the data. So, is there things, I know that you might be giving us homework, Chris, I understand, but as far as data and information that we need to go ahead and start looking at and reviewing to prepare and give to you to look at that information, is some things that we need to be working on now.
I mean, the low-hanging fruit is to really spend some time on your staffing schedules and your full-time equivalent report and make sure it's updated and accurate, captures vacancies, captures coverage, captures holiday, but you've got all these factors because we've discovered that a lot of people don't put a lot of effort in their FTE report. It's just a dump, and there's been no training from us on how to do one correctly. So we see that we're getting a lot of that aren't really reliable. Just by other analysis we're doing. So I would certainly dig into your staffing. And the second thing is your attendance. Just really start monitoring that and getting a real good feel of why are we running 65% attendance? What's going on in our day program? Do we have a quality of service issue where people don't want to come because when they come in, the place is filthy, or we don't have enough staff, or we don't have, unfortunately, people make a lot of decisions about what they're interested in based on a lot of intangibles, or cleanliness, or is it really loud in there? Is it freshly? I don't know. People make those kinds of decisions, but I would really start critically reviewing. If I'm not above 80% consistently, why am I not above 80%? Why am I losing people to adult day health care all the time if you're having that trend? So that's what I would suggest.
How about this as a suggestion? I'm just throwing it out there as my idea. This is kind of a organizing meeting. But this isn't the first time a rate's ever been built. I think it's how we build the rate is probably equally or more important than the rate we build, so that we all trust it. And the first three things that come to my mind, like what is doable in the next month? I know one thing is doable is we have a ton of cost data, and we got some really smart people who can crank cost data. We can look at we can drill down on what all the other states are doing and run across, this is what the rate is, this is the services, to get some comparability. And then the last one was, it was brilliant too. There was one more that, the third one was, and we're starting to work on it now, is go back and prepare a report. What's the statewide attendance rate at like waiver case management? What's the statewide attendance rate, and what's the individual provider's attendance rate? just so that we can get a snapshot of what it looks like currently.
Well, they should be doing that themselves every month anyways, but we are looking at trying to develop that as a reporting tool out of our area. But honestly, that's going to give you such high-level information that's not really useful. You really need to dig into the individual people, look at, are you not capturing attendance properly? Maybe it's a training issue, and dig down into it. But Pat's right. We are trying to develop kind of like a dashboard, similar to what we used to do way back, and similar to case management, so y'all can see that and how you stack up. But I mean, I wouldn't wait on that. I would be, first of all, you should be all over that every month already, in my opinion.
Yeah, I know.
Well, there's a potential payback. You should be recording a potential liability for a recoupment.
It is,
So-
and trust me, that's the way to do. But we have how many day programs in the state, Lori? 50 or 60?
No.
To say 60. We got to have a snapshot of what we're all doing together, and we'll put that snapshot together. And I just think these are the pieces that have to come together for a rate, and also we probably need to figure out some steering committee so that that people within the provider community who have time and interest and credibility among your peers want to play a closer role, so that as between our meetings, they're in the fight into some of these issues, that when we show back up with data sets, we have enough provider input that we're not too far off, and credibility at the same time. So that's just some of my thoughts.
Jason, as the president of the Human Service Provider outlet, do you have a concept of what structure you're thinking of? Did you identify folks from your membership, or you think everybody needs?
Sub-work group ready to go.
What's that?
I got a sub-work group, I'm tired, been a long day. We could do this tomorrow, so we're ready. I just thought this was, what I was told is everybody was going to participate at the whole time.
They are, but we.
I'm open to whatever makes sense, and yeah, we're good to go. So we can make that work as far as stage.
I think one other subset that we should start looking at deeper, because it's going to take time and effort, is the transportation, miles logged, that type of thing, because that's going to be one large component of, the rate calculation as well. I know, staffing patterns and attendance is important, but it's going to take some time to drill down into that data point.
Is that within the cost reports, or are we going to have to go out and recollect?
Well, it's in there, but the problem is, as I stated, when I was working out in the provider world, I can't tell you how many providers I worked with that their fleet was very, very antiquated and needed a refresh bad. So if folks are running vehicles that are 13 years old, depreciation's long been gone. You're talking 3 or 4 year asset. Your costs are not going to include the cost to your fleet to modernize it. So we're going to have to tweak those numbers to get good transportation figures. In fact, probably just building it out from scratch.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had down here transportation as a big issue, and even if it's nested within the rate, or if it's an add-on like it is for adult day health for certain scenarios.
One big point as we think about data that I'd like you guys to be wary of. In the regulation changes, there is a change that removes the 1 to 10 opportunity down to 1 to 7 for staffing ratios for DSPs. I think that makes our data not correct if that were to go forward, because right now we have the ability to go to 1 to 10 if you have a certain license type, and I understand that's being proposed to remove. That's another one of those kind of like the day to me, half day. I think that decision needs to be kind of nailed, because 1 to 7 is different than 1 to 10.
Sure.
Even as we get into the uniqueness, I like the special categories. I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about the general, across the board. I think we need you guys to give us some of the constants. I know we talked about a lot of things that aren't constant.
Right.
But there's some things that could be constant, and then we can start building on the constant.
I agree 100%.
And that staffing ratio is a big constant, I think. And I understand, I read the regulations, what the proposal is. If that's it, then that's the one we need to go with, and that is it. But that would make our historical data not accurate, because I'm built on different ratios. And all the data I'm going to give you is based upon a 1 to 10 ratio. I just think we should consider that.
Online, I guess we still weren't clear enough that July 1 is not the go live date on this. We've got too much work to do. I think the original time, when we originally stated the July 1, there was an idea that we could just take our existing rates and roll the split rate out to y'all and make that your rate and debundle the day service, but we've had to drop back and punt on that, so we're not taking that angle right now. So, any other questions from the field? Anybody in here not in the human service provider group that wants to vocalize your representation in this process?
Or that would like to join because we take ownership.
Right. I think it's just very important that we acknowledge that not everybody is in these groups, and we don't want you to lose your voice because you're not in one of the groups. So if there's anyone in here, you don't have to speak up right now, but we do not want to exclude you if you're not within there. So please feel free to continue to participate in these. Anything else?
Whether or not
So-
is in the group, though, once you get to a point where you've got the foundation of the building blocks to the rate, then is it my understanding, then you will push that out for further comment on the...
I believe you have to. Yeah.
I see this as an iterative process. We get data, we start building the rate. At some point, it gets down to diminishing returns, and then we beat on it. And also, when we get close, when we start building it up, we got to get HHS into this fight so that we don't go off on a tangent. But I think it all starts with the building blocks, much like Mercer did. What's your ratio? What's your dollar amount? What's your overhead rates? There's a lot of fundamental cost stuff that will get us maybe to the 60 or 70 percentile. Then we bring in other states and some vacancy rate issues, and then we start shaping it up. So I think it's more incremental, but I want us to move the ball between meetings, and part of that is have a tangible, due out from this meeting. And I think cost is number one. We have to exploit all our cost data.
Yeah, so from a go-forward perspective, we'll get out a survey and possibly some spreadsheets and call for data so that you can start crunching on some things. In the meantime, though, I would challenge y'all to identify how you want to be represented.
That's a great idea.
In the next meeting, so that you're all free to come if you want, but just realize it's like having a huge board of directors trying to build consensus among 23 people. That's why you have 7 or 9 board members. I think if you could decide how you want to be represented, handle that on your side, and then in the meantime, we will get out, like I said, a survey to ask some thought-provoking questions so that we can start gathering some data, and then some Excel or Word documents that we need you to start crunching some information. Anything else? I appreciate all the brain power in here. Thank y'all.
Run down the states.